An elderly widow is brutally murdered in her home.
This was an absolute senseless crime.
Police have little evidence and no one's talking.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community.
But a psychic has disturbing visions of the crime.
She had been stabbed so many times.
Can a psychic's insights solve the mystery of who killed Rose Schwartwood? Elmira, New York, an historic town of clapboard houses and white picket fences. A town Huckleberry Finn author Mark Twain once called home. A town unaccustomed to crime. But not on August 25th, 1988. On that day, 74-year-old Rose Schwartwood, widowed and living alone, is found dead in her apartment. She'd been the victim of a shocking attack. Beaten, bitten, and stabbed to death.
I think the nature of the crime, being an elderly woman that lived alone, was very upsetting.
It caught a lot of the media attention and upset a lot of the people in the community.
I mean, it was a terrible, heinous crime.
Mike Moosey from the local sheriff's office and Corky Patterson from the Elmira Police Department are assigned to investigate this gruesome case.
Yeah, there hadn't been a murder in Elmira in several years.
Jim Pfeiffer is a journalist who covered the story.
What bothered people the most, I thought, was this is a woman who's innocent, who has no enemies. It could happen to me. You know, it isn't supposed to happen to anyone, but especially to people like this.
It was believed from the very beginning of this investigation that it was possibly a burglary gone to a homicide rather than a planned homicide. I think we felt quite strongly that this was not anticipated to be a homicide from the beginning, but more a burglary gone bad.
Moosey and Patterson face major problems. Despite the apparent frenzy of the murder, little forensic evidence was left behind by Rose's killers.
The crime scene was very cleaned up. There were some things disturbed still when the police arrived there, but it appeared they had scrubbed down the walls and the floors with some type of cleaning agent.
Not only this, but locals are reluctant to talk.
A lot of times people just would clam up and they'd give them false information. So it'd make it more difficult for the police, who in this community were used to quickly solving a crime.
Rose lived in one of Elmira's tougher neighborhoods, the Hawthorne Court housing project.
I believe there were people that felt they would be threatened if they cooperated with the police.
Scores of potential suspects are interviewed and eliminated. Only 2 rise to the top of the list. William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore, both local, both well known to police.
We were relatively certain who these suspects were and what their involvement in the crime was.
With little evidence to tie Cuddy and Moore to the crime scene and no witnesses prepared to come forward, the investigation gradually stalls.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community. Police being blamed for not doing a good job, when that wasn't the case. They were doing a good job. They just couldn't get a lot of cooperation, a lot of information.
Months pass with no new leads. The case grows cold. But detectives Moosey and Patterson don't give up. They're not about to let Rose Schwartwood's killers away with murder. 2 years after her homicide, with nothing to lose, Detective Moosey decides to try something very different. He decides to enlist a psychic.
I had heard about Phil Jordan from other law enforcement agencies. I had never been to him before.
Phil Jordan is one of America's best-known psychics with a strong track record of helping cops solve difficult crimes.
I have been working with the police for the past 35 years.
Jordan uses photographs to make a psychic connection to crime scenes.
When I work on a case, I will take a picture of the victim. And as I look at that picture, I start seeing things about that person.
Detectives decide to tell Jordan nothing about Rose Schwartwood or her murder.
When Corky and Mike came to the first meeting, they brought a picture of Rose Schwartwood with them. And I looked at that picture and did a reading.
Right away, Jordan surprises the police.
The perpetrators, I felt, came into the dwelling believing they were going to do a burglary, and they were surprised to find that there was a person in the house. And then I feel as though both the perpetrators felt as though the whole situation went completely wrong, that they had gotten much more involved than they wanted to in the crime itself.
Jordan claims his visions reveal not only what happened during the crime, but also what the killers did after.
Then I felt as though they would try to put things back the way they had found it.
Again, the cops are surprised. Jordan has just identified the reason their investigation has so little physical evidence. But the big question is, can he tell them who killed Rose Schwartwood? To find out, they hand him a stack of photos.
I took probably between 50 and 75 mugshots of various people to see if any of them had any significance to him whatsoever.
We had pictures of people who had been suspects but ruled out, and we had pictures of people who we didn't think had any involvement whatsoever. No names on any of the photographs or anything.
Just quietly, we sat there for approximately 10 or 15 minutes as he flipped through several mugshots. And I noticed, as did Sergeant Patterson, he pulled out a picture of Bill Cuddy and set it aside. He then continued to flip through the photographs, and probably 20 or 30 photographs later, he pulled a mugshot of Demetrius Moore, and he laid that down.
I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
It was a moment that would change the course of a 2-year investigation.
When he pulled those two pictures out and set them aside, I was trying my best not to look at Sergeant Patterson, but he had pulled out our 2 prime suspects.
With no prior knowledge, how could the psychic have zeroed in on the 2 prime suspects?
Just about everything that he described was pretty much on the money.
But can a psychic's dark visions help police find justice for Rose Schwartwood? For 2 years, Elmira, New York area detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been hunting the vicious killer of an elderly widow.
Very unusual for us to have a crime like that. It was extremely rare here.
With little evidence and no witnesses, the police investigation had hit a wall, until a psychic identifies the 2 prime suspects who, up to now, detectives haven't had the evidence to arrest.
When he completed going through all the photographs, he put the rest of them down and said that he felt that the 2 that he had pulled out, that being the photographs of Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy, were in fact the 2 people that he felt were directly involved in the crime of the death of Rose Schwartwood.
William Cuddy is a name very familiar to Elmira police.
Cuddy was doing time. He pled guilty in June of '89 to the sexual abuse charge that I had originally investigated him on.
William Cuddy was a suspect because a jailhouse informant had contacted Detective Moosey saying Cuddy had been bragging in jail about killing Rose. But when the detective tried to question Cuddy, the prisoner wouldn't talk.
He had an incredible loss of memory. He did not wish to remember any of the details and immediately posed a problem for us.
Demetrius Moore is another story.
Demetrius Moore was actually a neighbor of the victim and was questioned along with several other people as a potential suspect.
Moore has remained a suspect because he had a motive. He blamed Rose and her complaints about his loud music for his eviction from Hawthorne Court.
In fact, a few weeks prior to her death, some obscenities were written on her back door. It was alleged that Demetrius was the one that was responsible for putting those obscenities on the back door.
People in the neighborhood are afraid of Demetrius Moore. Rumors on the street say he is linked to the criminal underworld. His reputation has been a major stumbling block to the investigation.
Demetrius was free and on the street, and which was another thing that hampered some people wanting to cooperate with us.
By pulling the two mugshots, Phil Jordan has confirmed the suspicions of the detectives. Now the psychic has a vision of the actual crime.
Whenever I work a case, I not only try to discover how the person may have died, but I also try to figure out what the injuries were inflicted with. In this case, I felt as though she was stabbed, and I could feel that there'd be a rather long knife that was used.
If one was to read the autopsy report, they'd understand that Mr. Jordan's descriptions were quite correct.
The psychic also claims he can see which of the two suspects actually stabbed Rose.
Phil described to us that the person who did the actual slaying, the actual killing itself, would have a tattoo on their shoulder.
I noticed a marking on his arm that would be a tattoo, and I felt that it had a woman's name in it, but I couldn't make out the woman's name.
I knew that Cuddy had such a tattoo on his left shoulder. Mike was not aware of it. No one else connected with the case was aware of it.
And that he was the perpetrator, the assailant that killed Rose Schwartwood.
The tattoo is a stunning revelation, one that Jordan had no way of knowing.
Yeah, he was able to describe Mr. Cuddy as being a vicious person, a person who hated women, had a deep hatred for women.
After 2 frustrating years, Detectives Moosey and Patterson's visit to Phil Jordan re-energizes the case. More than ever, they believe Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are responsible for the death of Rose Schwartwood.
We left there with some pretty surprising feelings that he had told us things about Cuddy that probably not a lot of people had known or even investigated.
But now the police must prove that Cuddy and Moore are the killers, and it's not going to be easy.
So we continued to build the case, and we weren't going to jump before we had all the evidence we could collect and all the information that we needed.
A major difficulty has been placing Cuddy and Moore at the crime scene. The detectives revisit the forensic evidence.
There was a sample of blood that was found at the point of entry, which is a rear door, a small broken window.
The drop of blood doesn't match the DNA of either Rose Schwartwood or William Cuddy, but trying to match it to Demetrius Moore has stymied the police.
You would have to apply for a court order. And in this case, in order to get a court order, you would at least need enough evidence to substantiate that this person was a viable suspect. Initially, we didn't feel we had enough evidence to do that.
The other piece of forensic evidence comes from the victim's body, bite marks. In the struggle before she died, Rose Schwartwood was bitten on the shoulder.
Bite marks are very difficult to identify most of the time, especially when the victim is the receiver of the bite mark.
Though the psychic and the cops both believe William Cuddy stabbed Rose, the investigators don't believe he bit her, and for good reason.
Mr. Cuddy wore dentures, and it was clear that the person who did the biting didn't wear dentures.
If Moore and Cuddy were accomplices in the murder, Moore must be the one who did the biting.
There was actually a photograph taken of Demetrius Moore's teeth on the day of the homicide. When he was being interviewed, the detectives thought enough and were smart enough to take a voluntary picture of his teeth.
Demetrius Moore's teeth may be the key to solving the murder mystery, but he's about to do something no one could ever imagine. For 2 years, detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been investigating the murder of elderly widow Rose Schwartwood.
This was an absolute senseless crime from the very beginning.
Psychic Phil Jordan has identified the 2 prime suspects, Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy.
At the time of the incident, I believe that I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
Detectives have only 2 significant pieces of evidence: a single drop of blood and bite marks found on the victim. Police believe the bite marks belong to Demetrius Moore, but before they can prove it, Moore does something very strange.
The unique thing there was it was found that Demetrius had filed his teeth.
Using a chisel, incredibly, Moore files down his own teeth. What's worse for detectives, they're still unable to obtain a warrant to test Moore's DNA or indeed make a mold of his now damaged teeth. Frustrated, the detectives return to Phil Jordan. What they really want to know is what connects their two prime suspects.
There was no information, or anyone had never come forward to put those two together at any given time.
Again, the psychic, who has been told nothing about the case, amazes the detectives. He confirms their belief that Cuddy and Moore were together at a party the night Rose was killed.
I felt as I observed the party, it would be a party I would not want to go to because I know I would feel uncomfortable by the character of people that were there. I could see that it was people having a good time, but yet more for the sake of partying to probably drink and get high.
The party is crucial to the investigation. It's the potential link that puts Cuddy and Moore together the night of the murder.
When we learned about the party initially occurring the night of the homicide, it was very difficult for us to get people at the party to remember who came, who left, who was there, who came with who. So locating people that were at the party for additional information on these two or anyone else that might have been with them was very difficult for a period of time.
I remember very distinctly seeing the house where I felt that the party had taken place, that there would have to be an enclosed stairwell going up the outside of the house.
He felt that the house was, I believe he said, green in color and had a very distinct outside staircase which led to a second floor, which Sergeant Patterson and I knew to be the location of the party house.
I felt as though they would be first at the party, they would leave the party, commit this heinous act, and then go back to the party, which showed me they probably had little conscience.
Is Jordan's paranormal vision correct? Detectives in Elmira, New York are closer than ever to solving the murder of Rose Schwartwood. Armed with a psychic's visions of the crime, they confront reluctant witnesses.
We did have people that came forward, finally, and did remember Cuddy coming with Demetrius Moore. Yes, that link was finally made.
Those witnesses now paint a startling portrait of Moore and Cuddy's behavior the night of the murder.
Demetrius and Cuddy left the party, supposed to go get some beer and money for beer and drugs or whatever. When they returned, Cuddy had a lot of blood on him. Demetrius had a small amount on him, and there was some argument out on the porch, and I believe Demetrius was saying something like, you didn't have to kill her like that.
Once again, Phil Jordan was right. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy were together the night Rose Schwartwood was killed. Finally, police have the link that puts their suspects together the night of the crime. They can now get the court order to compare Moore's DNA with that single drop of blood found at the crime scene.
We certainly felt confident that there would be a match, or at least a grouping that was consistent with, which would be sound evidence against him being at the scene of the crime, which he had denied, for years at this point.
Demetrius Moore's DNA matches the blood found on Rose Schwartwood's broken window. Moore and Cuddy are charged with the second-degree murder of Rose Schwartwood. At the trial, Moore challenges one of the key pieces of evidence against him, that he filed down his teeth.
The most unusual thing I ever saw on a witness stand. His excuse was, when he took the stand, his teeth were chipped up like that because he opened beer bottles with his teeth. And he opened up 2 beer bottles on the stand. His lawyer wanted to show the jury on the stand.
What it didn't do is alter the pattern of his teeth. It certainly altered the ridges of the teeth.
So they couldn't match the bite marks exactly. It didn't do him any good to file his teeth.
Evidence at the trial showed Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy met at the party house. When they ran out of drugs and alcohol, Moore suggested they rob Rose.
Unfortunately, she had returned home that evening and was found in the apartment. She had apparently been getting ready for bed or just going to bed when the entry was made.
The robbers surprised Rose, There was a struggle. Moore bit the elderly, defenseless victim on the shoulder. Then William Cuddy began to stab her, and he stabbed her over 40 times. After killing Rose Schwartwood, Cuddy and Moore dragged her body to her bed, and before leaving, they methodically washed the blood from the floor and the walls, missing just a single drop. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are both found guilty, and both men are sentenced to 25 years.
I can't speak for the jury, so I don't know if it had an impact on the jury or on the trial. It had an impact on me that someone could not only brutally murder a 72 or 74-year-old woman this way, but then stay around and clean it up afterwards. They have to have no remorse, no conscience.
Today, the detectives are still amazed at the accuracy of Phil Jordan's visions. The psychic pulled William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore's photo from a stack of mugshots and identified Cuddy as the killer by a tattoo on his shoulder. Phil described the attack as a robbery gone bad and the party house where Cuddy and Moore hatched their plan.
A good psychic can provide you with leads or something, or an avenue to go on when you don't have any.
He's done some pretty amazing things.
They wanted to resolve the case for the family and for Rose, but they also wanted the community to be safe.
A lazy summer day at the lake turns to panic
I said, "Where's Tom?"
when a 5-year-old boy disappears.
I wondered if he was dead.
Police think he's drowned, but a local psychic says he's lost in the forest.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree.
Is the psychic right? Is Tommy Kennedy alive or dead? Empire Lake in picturesque upstate New York, a favorite spot to spend a summer afternoon, especially in the mid-70s.
It was a place where people could go and relax, or bring their picnic lunches and have a nice time.
But for Mary Kennedy, Empire Lake brings back memories of a day she will never forget. On a hot summer day in 1975, Mary Kennedy and her family head to Empire Lake to spend the day swimming.
My fiance and his 2 daughters, Siri and Lisa, and my 2 sons, Ben and Tom, we decided to go down to the lake and give the children a chance to cool off.
After swimming, Fred takes the kids for a nature walk.
It was all 4 of the children. I really don't remember why I didn't go.
Fred and the kids disappear into the woods.
While everyone was hiking, I was lying on the blanket, enjoying the day. Knowing me, I probably had a book with me.
But that enjoyment was about to end.
I see Fred and the children coming towards me. Everybody was sweaty and happy, and I don't see Tom.
Tommy is Mary's youngest son. He's 5 years old.
I felt a moment of panic. Fred comes up to me and I say, "Where's Tom?" And Fred says, "I sent him back to you."
Fred says Tom wasn't wearing shoes, and he complained his feet were hurting.
I sent him back to you just at the beginning of our trip. He was whiny and didn't seem to want to do the walk, and so I sent him back to you. He thought that Tom was more competent than he was. I would not have done that. Oh my God. Where's my child?
Mom! Help me! Where's everyone?
I remember just jumping up and starting to run around the lake, screaming for him.
They search frantically, backtracking their walk. Perhaps he's just hiding.
He was like a little imp, liked to play tricks on people. They were always busy doing something, building tree houses, exploring the fields. He was delightful.
But after 2 hours, no sign of Tommy. To add to their concern, a thunderstorm is moving in. They realize it's time to call the police.
By the time I arrived, Tommy had probably been missing 2 or 3 hours. It was probably somewhere around 4 or 5 o'clock by that time.
Dave Redsiger was a member of the local emergency squad in Spencer.
What we did was contacted all the surrounding fire departments.
I remember standing there and seeing the emergency vehicles beginning to arrive right down on the lawn. You know, they just bypassed the parking lot and they were setting up a command center down there on the lawn. It seemed like every car had a two-way radio going.
He's wearing a white t-shirt and a pair of plaid shorts.
I remember just regular people beginning to arrive. People standing in groups and being briefed and being told where to go.
Nobody seemed to see him around the campsite. Nobody seen him around the swim area. So you kind of narrow it down to 2 areas, the woods or the lake.
I look over and they're bringing boats in. And that only means one thing.
A dive team goes into the water to search for Tommy.
Near the camping area was heavily dead woods, a lot of stumps, things that, you know, if somebody got in there, they could very easily get entangled underneath the water and not be able to get back to the surface.
And I was just horrified. I was absolutely horrified. And I just wouldn't look at them. Absolutely didn't want to look at them.
The dive team searches the perimeter of the lake, but no sign of Tommy. The storm is getting worse.
Once the weather started to get bad and the lightning started getting pretty nasty, we had to call off the water search.
4 hours had passed since 5-year-old Tom went missing.
And by that time, it was pouring. It was just torrential. And I'm thinking about this little 5-year-old kid with a bathing suit on, out there in the cold rain, in the woods somewhere. And I'm just so scared for him.
8 miles away, in the town of Spencer, 25-year-old psychic Phil Jordan hears the news.
I ran across the backyard, and my landlord was standing in the back door, and she said a little boy was missing up at Empire Lake. She says they think he's in the lake and that he is drowned.
But out of nowhere, the psychic has a vision. He can see little Tommy.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree. That showed me that he was probably in the woods and probably not in the lake.
Is Tommy Kennedy still alive, lost in the woods? Is the psychic right? And will anyone listen? In upstate New York, a massive search is underway at Empire Lake for 5-year-old Tommy Kennedy, who vanished during a family picnic.
This little 5-year-old kid out there in the cold rain, and I'm just so scared for him.
The storm gets worse and day turns to night.
We really started getting some nasty storm weather coming in, and it blew in quite heavy. A lot of rain. And of course with that we got a lot of thunder and lightning, and it got quite cold.
The missing boy's father, Don Kennedy, a local reporter, arrives 8 hours after his son disappeared.
He had been out of town, and he had rushed to the lake.
Don begins frantically searching for his son, but now there's a new danger.
With the lightning and the thunder, we were really afraid of ending up with, more searchers lost besides the boy.
Redsicker has no choice. He calls off the search.
Intellectually I understood, but my little 5-year-old is out there still by himself.
Tommy's parents are desperate. Don Kennedy remembers a piece he'd written about a local psychic. By coincidence, it's Phil Jordan.
My 5-year-old child was lost. As far as I was concerned, bring in the National Guard. Bring in anyone who will help search for him and find him.
I was not surprised that he called me. I felt that I might hear from some of the family. He was really pleading. He wanted me to come up to the lake at that time.
The psychic says he can help to find the missing boy, but not just yet.
I just knew that if I went there, I would become contaminated with everyone else's ideas and not follow my own self, my own psychic self. I remember saying to Don Kennedy, I'm really sorry, but I just can't come right now. I have to wait till daylight because I don't want to miss a clue that could help us to find him.
With the search called off, and the psychic refusing to come to the lake until daybreak, Mary Kennedy is losing hope.
I'm wondering if he's cold, wondering if he's scared. I wondered if he was dead.
But back in Spencer, psychic Phil Jordan is already on the case.
I sometimes leaf through the Bible and just point to something. And there was a phrase, and it said something about the children going into the woods.
Suddenly, the psychic has a vision of exactly where to find Tommy. Although he's never been to Empire Lake, he begins to draw a map.
The first thing I knew was that down to my left, there would be 3 boats. And then I could see the building across the lake. And I knew I would have to go into the woods behind the building till we find a clearing. So I drew that all on the map.
But can this crudely drawn map lead to Tommy Kennedy? It's 5 a.m. The storm is over. Tommy Kennedy has been missing an agonizing 16 hours.
No parent should have to spend a night like that. I don't remember whether we ate supper, what we said to each other. It's blank.
Hundreds of volunteers from miles around gather at dawn to resume the search.
There were several fire trucks with personnel on them, at least 1 ambulance. We got the people together, told them what the boy's name was, and then had them search areas around the lake into the wooded areas, but we concentrated on the area immediately around the camping area and the bathing, swimming area.
I was just tremendously grateful that all these people just showed up.
Psychic Phil Jordan also arrives at the lake to help with the search.
I met Dave Redsicker, who was a friend of mine, but was the investigator in charge. Even I says, well, I have this map.
I was shocked. As simple as the map was, the things that he had drawn on the map were right there.
The 3 boats were there, exactly as I had drawn. And across, you could see a large tent. And I said, that has to be the building. We'll go in behind the tent.
But the searchers think he's wrong.
And what he was describing was an area that we hadn't searched yet, because it was an area that we figured was the most remote area, or most unlikely area that this child would have gotten into.
But the psychic is confident his map will lead to the lost boy. Before he begins his search, the psychic makes an unusual request.
He asked me for an article of clothing that belonged to Tom. So I asked Phil Jordan if one of his little sneakers would be okay, and Phil said absolutely.
His mom made sure I had that sneaker, and I tucked that into my belt, and I focused on Tommy Kennedy and finding him.
250 rescuers searched the south side of Empire Lake, the area closest to the spot where Tommy was last seen. Meanwhile, Phil Jordan and 2 volunteers, armed only with a psychic map and a little boy's shoe, head in the opposite direction.
There was myself and these 2 men that I didn't know.
I just wished them good luck, and they headed out into the woods.
25-year-old Phil Jordan has never tested his psychic powers in a life-and-death situation before, and he's never been to Empire Lake. But he has faith in his map.
I know we're going to find him, and we will find him within an hour. Tommy! Every little ways I would stop, and I'd say to myself, okay, we have to keep going straight. Now we have to turn left. Tommy! Now we have to go up here. We have to go a little bit to the right. And I remember talking to myself through the whole thing so I could block out any of the ideas that others had. It was rugged terrain. There was a hiking path, but it was uphill. A lot of woods, a lot of trees falling across the path, and treacherous going.
Is it possible that a 5-year-old without shoes could have strayed so far? The psychic is now deep in the woods, 2 miles from where Tommy Kennedy disappeared. And so far, the psychic has turned up nothing. And now, one of the 2 men with him is starting to have doubts.
One of them kept saying, everything you're describing is in another direction.
Yet hundreds of volunteers searching in the area where he should be can't find a trace of Tommy either.
Nothing. It was as if Tom had just vanished.
The psychic struggles to keep his vision.
And that's when I would refer to the map and hold on to his sneaker and say, Tommy, I'm coming. I'm going to find you.
But now even the psychic starts to doubt his map.
I was all ready to say, well, maybe we should check that other area and come back here later today.
And then Phil Jordan makes a startling discovery. On the shores of Empire Lake in upstate New York, Mary Kennedy waits desperately for any news of her 5-year-old son, Tommy, who's been missing for over 16 hours.
It was as if Tom had just vanished.
Hundreds of searchers comb the area around the lake where the boy disappeared, but with no luck. Yet 2 miles away, psychic Phil Jordan, following his crude map, has stumbled across a child's footprint.
It was right in front of me. I looked at that footprint and I thought, oh, we must be close. And I got goosebumps, you know.
That footprint convinces the psychic he's on the right track.
I said to the other searchers, now we have to find a clearing. It shouldn't be too far up here. So we continued on, and within moments we found the clearing. I just stood at the opening of the clearing and said to myself, okay, now which way do I have to go? I looked at it sort of as a clock, and I thought, we've got to go where the 11 is. And we went to that area, and there was another path through the woods.
As he climbs a gully, Phil falls behind the other searchers, but he can still hear them calling out Tommy's name. And then, an answer.
Help me! I'm over here! I woke up to the sound of people calling my name. I started screaming, I'm over here, I'm over here.
The fellow who tried to talk me into going in the other direction, he says, I hear him yelling. He's yelling for help. And so they all ran in the direction that the voice came from.
I saw these men coming towards me with huge smiles on their face. I was very relieved that they had found me. Everybody was giving Phil Jordan congratulations. I could tell right away that he was the one that was responsible for locating me.
I just dropped there and knelt there and thanked God that he had given me this ability and cried. You know, I just sobbed. It was very emotional. He was worried that he had done wrong. He was worried that he was going to be reprimanded. And it was quite the opposite. Everybody was so thankful.
Tommy Kennedy had been missing more than 16 hours. One of the searchers reminds Phil about a prediction he had made.
He says, 58 minutes. And I says, what does that mean? And he says, you told me we'd find him within an hour, and it was 58 minutes after we started.
Tommy's rescuers carry him out to a nearby road.
They had walkie-talkies, and they radioed for help, and soon the ambulance came to a road that was not far from where Tommy actually was.
And the news that Tommy is safe is radioed back to the lake.
Someone comes up to me and tells me that Tom has been found. It's like heaven opened up. I was just so grateful. Then almost instantly, there he is.
After almost 2 days of anguish, mother and son are reunited.
He says, I was camping, Mom. I slept next to a stick. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that he's found, and it's a miracle that he's okay.
Phil Jordan's visions had been right from the beginning. Tommy Kennedy hadn't gone near the lake. Instead, he had wandered deep into the forest.
I immediately started crying and whining as I was walking back, and I'm sure that contributed to me getting lost. I probably wasn't paying attention to the marks on the path. I just started running in circles, and within a very short period of time, the clouds rolled in, and that first lightning bolt came down. Then I was terrified, and I started running and running and running.
Wet, scared, and exhausted, he remembered what his mother had taught him.
I taught my children standard safety, which is you don't go near the water when there's lightning. Find a sheltered place.
I came upon a sort of a clearing, and I found a nice large stick to fend off any attacking animals.
Phil had marked just such a clearing on his map.
I was completely exhausted by that time, so I didn't have any trouble at all falling asleep.
How could a psychic with a crudely drawn map succeed where 250 rescuers failed?
If it hadn't been for Phil, and his map and his abilities, we either wouldn't have found him for a long time or we may not have found him at all.
I'm certain that Phil Jordan saved Tom's life.
Word that Phil Jordan had found a lost boy using his psychic abilities is big news. Even the local sheriff, who is not in the habit of using the paranormal, recognizes his achievement.
And he says, I would like you to become deputized so that if we have other cases, you can work more freely with law enforcement.
So help me God.
At that time, Phil was the only deputized psychic that I was aware of in New York State.
Phil Jordan's amazing accomplishment at Empire Lake paved the way for psychics all over America to team up with police in solving difficult cases.
It was truly an honor to be deputized because at that time in history, psychics were just beginning to be used a little bit in police work.
It's now 32 years since psychic Phil Jordan found little Tommy Kennedy lost in the woods. They haven't seen each other since. Until today.
Good to see you.
Phil still has the shoe that helped him to find Tommy so long ago.
I put it in my belt, and I'd say, okay, Tommy, tell me where you are. Do you remember that day?
I do. I remember running through the woods. I remember the lightning. I remember finding a stick to sleep with.
Seeing
I remember.
the wild bear.
Exactly. Yeah, like my 5-year-old with a stick is going to do something
That's
to
right,
a bear.
That's right.
But
well, you were using your head.
Yeah.
That's the best way you knew how.
Right. Yeah. And the next thing I remember is hearing you guys. You know, I heard you calling for me and waking up.
It was that day that I proved my ability to myself. And from then on, no one's ever convinced me that I can't do what I do.
Without him, they might have been looking for my bones, you know?